electric van production at its plant near London, Ontario. The automaker says decreased demand has pushed it to stop making the bright drop electric delivery van.
Ontario's auto industry is being dealt yet another blow, with General Motors officially ending production of one of its vehicles.
Has suffered another blow as General Motors is ending production of its bright drop electric delivery van in Ingersoll.
For decades, auto manufacturing in North America has relied on a tightly woven supply chain. Parts cross borders multiple times, from the US to Canada, Mexico and back, under treaties and agreements designed to make auto production efficient and cost-effective. This integration has long been a backbone of the continental economy. Canada in particular plays a key role. In 2024, automotive trade between Canada and the US totaled roughly 152 billion Canadian dollars, about 100+ billion US dollars, with roughly half in exports and imports. But the new political currents sweeping the United States, focused on reshoring manufacturing, protecting domestic industry, and using tariffs to punish unfair trade practices, began to throw a wrench into that system. In early 2025, the Trump administration moved aggressively. Under a new invocation of trade rules, the US imposed dramatic tariffs, 25% on imported automobiles, passenger vehicles, light trucks, certain parts, that did not meet strict US content thresholds under the Continental Trade Agreement, CUSMA. Even for vehicles that did qualify under CUSMA, tariffs would apply, but only on the non-US content. For many automakers with global supply chains, that meant increased costs, complexity, and risk. The announcement sent shockwaves through Canada's auto industry. Executives warned that production, pricing, and viability of many plants might be at stake. Amid this growing pressure, the Canadian government began to prepare its response. In late 2025, GM quietly signaled a major shift. The company announced it would end production of certain electric vans at its plant in Ingersoll, Ontario, a blow that threatened jobs for about 1,200 workers. At the same time, other signals from automakers in North America suggested manufacturing would be reallocated south of the border, closer to US plants, to avoid the new tariffs and cost headwinds. For example, certain upcoming vehicle lines from Stellates were reportedly being moved from Canadian plants to US factories in states like Illinois or Michigan. For many Canadians, workers, government officials, everyday citizens, this felt like a betrayal. After years of investment, incentives, and political promises, big automakers seemed willing to abandon their Canadian footprint, just when those jobs mattered most. Automakers likely expected a passive response. After all, shutting down a few plants, retooling, and shifting production isn't new in global manufacturing. Companies often rely on governments not making waves, especially when closing plants and moving jobs. It would be messy, but Canada, given its history with friendly trade and deep auto integration, might just shrug. But they underestimated Ottawa. And they misread public sentiment. In response to the US tariffs and the departure plans of automakers, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly and other senior officials announced a bold counterattack. Canada would impose 25% tariffs on US vehicles and certain trucks imported into Canada, especially those that didn't meet CUSMA origin rules. This was more than a symbolic gesture. It was a direct economic blow, not just to American exporters, but to automakers relying on cross-border manufacturing flows. The Canadian government framed it as a defense not only of Canadian industry and workers, but of national economic sovereignty. Joly said Canada was leading the charge, and promised Ottawa would continue to escalate if US tariffs remained. Behind the scenes, the government reportedly rolled out a mechanism sometimes referred to as an auto diminishment framework, essentially a plan to penalize, economically and administratively, any automaker that abandoned Canada, moved production abroad, or failed to meet certain investment or production thresholds. In effect, stay invested in Canada, or pay the price. That pressure arrived with a sharp ultimatum: companies had to act fast, or face tariffs, penalties, and a loss of incentives. Dealers, suppliers, and boardrooms across Detroit and Washington began to scramble. According to reporting around the issue, GM and other automakers were suddenly begging for a way back into Canada. The effect was immediate and dramatic. According to insiders, U.S. dealerships began reporting shortages of inventory as automakers put North American supply chains on hold or restructured them entirely. Automakers faced mounting pressure on profitability, tariffs, increased costs, and the uncertainty of shifting production lines threatened margins and investor confidence. The political blowback reverberated in Washington. What had begun as a U.S. initiative to protect American jobs now risked crippling the integrated North American auto sector, including employers in U.S. states. The broader economic implications began to alarm manufacturers, unions, analysts, and even parts suppliers. In short, what automakers thought would be a quiet retreat turned into an economic and political firestorm. For workers in Ontario, Quebec, and across Canada who depend on auto factories, parts suppliers, and associated jobs, this was a stand. It was a message: Canada will not sit idly by while foreign companies reap benefits and abandon our workforce at the first sign of profit trouble. By using tariffs and threats, the government forced automakers to reconsider abandoning their Canadian footprint. More broadly, the move reaffirmed that sovereign economic decisions can no longer be assumed away just because of legacy supply chains. This isn't just about GM or one plant. The ripple effects could reshape how auto companies plan their operations, source parts, and think about North American manufacturing. For decades, integration across borders meant companies could rely on the lowest cost supplier for each component, regardless of country, and build cars efficiently. But now, with national governments willing to weaponize tariffs and retaliatory measures, the calculus changes. Companies may need to weigh the stability and political risk of supply chains, even if it means higher costs. Perhaps most important, this episode shifts power. For decades, automakers held leverage. They decided where to produce, when to close, and how to allocate resources. Now, under pressure from governments deciding to defend their workers and economies, that power tilts. Governments, not just market forces, are back in the driver's seat. And as we've seen, the decisions will be political, economic, even national security oriented, not just about profit margins. GM and other automakers must now ask themselves, is it worth abandoning Canada? The cost, in tariffs, in reputational damage, in lost access to Canadian workers and expertise, may no longer justify savings from moving plants south. Some may decide to stay, maintain operations in Canada, accept stricter origin requirements, maybe even reinvest. Others may push harder to decentralize supply chains, or move production to other countries. Either way, it's a complex, risk-laden path ahead. President Trump's original tariffs, meant to bring back American jobs, may end up hurting more than helping. The fallout: supply chain disruptions, higher prices, industry instability. Now, with Canada retaliating forcefully, and with US automakers and parts suppliers caught in the middle, the political and economic cost could be steep. For Trump, for Detroit, for the US economy, this may mark a turning point where protectionism begins to look like a boomerang. What's happened here may be a blueprint. Other countries watching may be emboldened. Governments may recalibrate. Supply chains will need to consider not only cost, but stability, political risk, origin content, and domestic employment effects. In short, we may have entered a new era, one where globalization doesn't mean borderless supply chains, but strategic, sovereignty-oriented manufacturing. Consumers may pay the price. Tariffs often raise costs for dealers, manufacturers, and ultimately buyers. If automakers pass on added costs, vehicle prices may rise. For ordinary citizens in Canada, and possibly the US, that means more expensive cars or fewer choices. Supply chain disruption could be chaotic. North American auto manufacturing evolved over decades to optimize costs, disrupting that might lead to inefficiencies, delays, and unintended consequences. Risk of escalation. What if the US retaliates further? Or what if other sectors get dragged in? A tit-for-tat trade war could harm broader economic growth, beyond autos, steel, lumber, agriculture, technology. Indeed, Canada has already started imposing tariffs on a wide array of US goods in response. Long-term uncertainty. Automakers hate uncertainty. If these tariff wars continue or expand unpredictably, companies might hesitate to invest in Canada or elsewhere, which could slow growth, stifle innovation, and ultimately hurt workers. This isn't only about cars. It's about sovereignty, fairness, and national strategy. For decades, globalization offered countries like Canada an opportunity to lean into integrated supply chains, benefiting from trade deals, specialization, and comparative advantage. It worked until political tides changed. Now, with rising nationalism, supply chain fragility, and geopolitical competition, countries are rethinking: are we sacrificing control for convenience? In that context, what Canada has done is signal a new posture, one where trade is not just a matter of economics, but of strategic autonomy. Defense of jobs, industries, and domestic markets. If other countries follow suit, and if corporations begin to internalize that supply chain risk isn't just operational but political, we might see a broader reshaping of globalization, towards regional trade blocs, tighter origin rules, and more emphasis on national manufacturing resilience. In short, what's going on in the auto industry may foreshadow the next chapter of global trade, where supply chain resilience, not just cost, becomes the measure of sound strategy.